Puerto Rico, mi gente. The next video you're about to watch is the whole entire history of Puerto Rico condensed in less than 13 minutes. This is a wild one, y'all.
In the northeastern Caribbean sits a mountainous island called Puerto Rico, or as the Taino called it, boriken, meaning land of the valiant lord. Between Hispaniola and the Virgin Islands, it guards the doorway to the Greater Antilles like a stone lion at the entrance of the Caribbean palace. Before Spain imagined it, before the forts and cannons, this island was Taino land. Hammocks swung, cassava baked, and diplomacy was handled not by lawyers but by the noble ball game, a sport where honor was on the line and nobody yelled at referees because there weren't any. In 1493, Columbus returned to the Caribbean on his second voyage. Bigger ships, bigger expectations, and definitely bigger flags. The Taino carried diplomacy, tobacco, and curiosity. The first contact was polite, as first meetings often are, before history decides otherwise. Spain settled Puerto Rico in 1508 by Juan Ponce de Leon, the same Juan Ponce de Leon who later associated with the Fountain of Youth expedition to Florida 1513. Spain found something, gold, not mountains, not rivers glittering like El Dorado, just enough to make kings impatient and accountants hopeful. For gold, the Taino were forced into encomienda, a polite word for labor without the freedom to say no. Death arrived not first by sword, but by disease, coercion, and hunger. Then came rebellion. Early Spaniards in the Caribbean often claimed God protects them, Christians go to heaven alive, death is temporary, souls are eternal, saints resurrect, and Christ resurrected after 3 days. To indigenous listeners, this sounded less like theology and more like we are immortal. Europeans didn't intend it that way, but cross-culturally, that's what was heard. Enters Guebana, also known as Aguebana II, better known as Aguebana el Bravo, or Aguebana the Brave. Upon Aguebana I's death in 1510, his brother Aguebana the Brave became the most powerful chief in the island. He was troubled by the treatment of his people by the Spanish. He began to doubt their claims about immortality. To test Spanish claims of divine power, the Taino conducted a very literal experiment. They drowned a Spaniard named Diego Salcedo. If he resurrected, perhaps the newcomers were gods. He did not resurrect. Conclusion, mortal. Experiment complete. Salcedo wasn't captured in battle. He was invited on a routine trip, escorted to a river, and subjected to what may be the first peer-reviewed drowning experiment in Caribbean history. Christian doctrine holds that Christ rose after 3 days, so the Taino waited 3 days to observe the body. Nothing happened. With mortality confirmed, Aguebana II rallied the caciques, chiefs, and launched the first recorded war in Puerto Rican history in 1511. Historians note that the war lasted roughly 2 years, though Aguebana II himself was killed during the conflict. His direct leadership likely lasted about a year, but the rebellion continued after his death. For nearly 2 years, the Taino fought through rainforest terrain while Spain deployed steel, horses, gunpowder, and mastiffs large enough to qualify as nightmares. The rebellion eventually collapsed. Spain claimed victory. In 1512, Spain passed laws of Burgos to protect Taino from punishments. By 1520, the Taino presence on the island had almost disappeared. With Taino numbers collapsing, Spain imported enslaved Africans, not for sugar, but for mining, cattle, and transport. In Puerto Rico, slavery fed soldiers, not Europe. Where Britain built sugar estates, Spain built walls and forts. Puerto Rico became the shield of the Spanish Caribbean, protecting treasure fleets heading from Mexico and Peru. Santo Domingo had gold, Haiti had sugar, Jamaica had profits. Puerto Rico had mountains and soldiers. The island produced small farmers instead of plantation aristocrats. In 1542, Spain issued the new laws that freed the Tainos as a last resort to save the dying Taino people, but it was too late. By 1600, there were no more full-blooded Tainos. By the late 1700s, Puerto Rico was a tri-ancestry society. They consist of Spanish fathers, African and Taino mothers, a mix of free people of color, peasants, and small planters, a Caribbean recipe with fewer slaves than Jamaica and more free people than Cuba. In 1804, when Haiti abolished slavery and defeated France, every slave-holding power trembled. Spain trembled enough to redesign policy. In 1815, Madrid opened the doors to European settlers, Canary Islanders, Italians, Germans, French, Corsicans, and Irish through the Royal Decree of Graces. The whitening wasn't about appearances. It was a calculated counter-revolution policy. Before 1815, Puerto Rico was majority mixed and minority white. After Spain panicked over Haiti, it whitened the island with immigration, paperwork, and marriage. By 1898, the white population went from 20% to 60%, and Puerto Rico became the most loyal of Spain's Caribbean colonies. Whitening did not erase Africa or Taino from Puerto Rico, it merely renamed them. Modern DNA ancestry breakdown 60 to 70% European, 15 to 25% African, and 10 to 20% Taino ancestry. Puerto Rico has the highest Taino DNA today because it never became a sugar empire. The mountains protected the peasants preserved the mothers, and the mothers carried the ancestry into the future. Puerto Rico used the same Iberian Spanish caste system as the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and much of Spanish America, but again it operated differently because of demographics plus economy plus mixing. So the categories existed, but the social enforcement was looser and the boundaries more permeable. Spanish caste system, everyone gets a category. British system, 2 categories, white and problem. Puerto Rico, categories exist but everyone's cousins. In the 1800s, Puerto Rico experimented with coffee and sugar. Coffee thrived, sugar survived. The island produced more beans than kings. Slavery existed but never dominated. Puerto Rico lacked the extreme plantation industrial brutality seen in Cuba and Saint Domingue, but it was still slavery. Haiti proved Europeans could be defeated, slavery could be destroyed, and self-sovereignty could be built all from a Caribbean island. Dominican Republic proved Spain was beatable. Puerto Rico staged its first independence rebellion. On September 23, 1868, patriots unfurled the flag and declared the Republic of Puerto Rico. The rebellion collapsed within hours, but ideas live longer than governments. Puerto Rico's 1868 rebellion fought for both independence and abolition. Independence was the political goal. Abolition was the moral and strategic partner. It wasn't Haiti-style emancipation war or DR-style political war. It was an alliance of both goals against Spain. Puerto Rico claimed independence before Cuba. While PR had a 10-hour republic, Cuba had a 10-year war. During Cuba's war, Spain was pressured by the United States after 1865, not through direct commands, but through U.S. abolition making Spain look archaic, U.S. diplomatic and moral influence in Caribbean politics, U.S. support for Cuban separatists. Spain in 1873, fine, we'll end slavery, but no independence that costs extra. Caribbean, nice try, empire. And in 1873, Spain finally abolished slavery, one of the last acts of its Caribbean empire. Puerto Rico became the test case to remove abolition from the table without conceding independence. Meanwhile, Cuba was fighting Spain for independence. The USS Maine was stationed in Havana Harbor to protect U.S. interests, but it mysteriously exploded, and Spain was blamed. In 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. After the Spanish-American War, Spain ceded Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. Puerto Rico was not asked for an opinion, only a surrender. When the treaty was signed, Puerto Rico passed from one empire to another like a monopoly property nobody landed on voluntarily. Spain abolished slavery in Puerto Rico partly to avoid losing Puerto Rico to separatism and U.S. influence. Yet 25 years later, the U.S. took Puerto Rico anyway. The U.S. kept the Spanish defensive logic intact. Puerto Rico became a strategic naval base for the future Panama Canal. The Four Acre Act invented the term unincorporated territory. a category vague enough to require annual interpretation. In 1917, Puerto Ricans became U.S. citizens, and the island became key in the First World War recruitment and maritime law. In the 1930s to 1950s, Puerto Rican nationalism collided with U.S. colonial policy. Pedro Albizu Campos was the president of the Nationalist Party of Puerto Rico. He was arrested for seditious conspiracy, officially for plotting revolution, but in truth for leading Puerto Rico's independence movement. He was the kind of leader empires fear: educated, disciplined, charismatic, and unbuyable. Albizu was not jailed for bombs, but for ideas. The United States did not fear his rifle, it feared his republic. In 1937, Puerto Rican Nationalist Party organized a peaceful march to commemorate the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico by the governing Spanish National Assembly in 1873 and protest the arrest of Pedro Albizu Campos. Police fired into a peaceful nationalist march in Ponce, killing 19 and wounding over 200. None of the civilians were armed, and most of the dead were reportedly shot in their backs. It was called the Ponce Massacre because all the synonyms were too gentle. In 1950, uprisings in Jayuya and Utuado declared the republic again. This time, the National Guard deployed planes and bombed Jayuya, making Puerto Rico one of the few places in the Americas bombed by its own government. In 1952, Puerto Rico became a commonwealth, a political invention halfway between colony, state, and riddle. Commonwealth is what you create when no one agrees on independence or statehood, and Congress refuses to pick. After 1952, the island's central question became independence, statehood, enhanced commonwealth. Referendums came, referendums went. Congress observed politely. Puerto Rico did not win independence, but it won something harder. It stayed itself. It kept its language, its flag, its mixture, its music, its mountain towns, its diaspora, and its humor. Few islands can survive 4 centuries of empire and still sing in their own voice. 5 centuries produced a people forged from Taino resilience, African endurance, Spanish militarism, and European migrations, European fathers, Taino and African mothers, the genetic signature of a soldier labor colony. Puerto Rico never became the sugar baron of the Caribbean. It became something rarer, a fortress surrounded by farmers, ruled by empires, and carried forward by people who refused to disappear. Empires arrived expecting gold. Puerto Rico delivered resistors, coffee, political debates, and a status question that no empire has solved in 500 years. Across the Americas, mixture often came with fracture, caste against caste, color against color, revolutions against republics. Puerto Rico did something rarer. It turned conquest into kinship, labor into lineage, and 3 continents into a single people who call themselves Boricua. That is Puerto Rican pride, the pride of continuity.
Now that's a badass little mini documentary right there. In that video, what is it that we have learned? That everything that they have been doing to every individual country, taking over their resources, massacring all the people of that country, usurping their identity, and then brainwashing the rest of the remaining survivors with religion to then only get assimilated to the big corporations around the world. It makes perfect sense why Puerto Rico is at the state that it's in now. You may take away our buildings, you may take away our electricity, you may take away every avenue of lifestyle, strip us bare bones to our minimum, but in the end, the Latino people will always unite, rise up, and do what the fuck we gotta do. Neocolonialism hasn't changed, just got a brand new face. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, and follow for more.